The story unfolds with the aftermath of my wife's betrayal. Claire had been everything to me until I uncovered the cold truth. It was a slow burn at first, small inconsistencies, late nights, whispered phone calls. But I knew. I could feel it, deep in my gut, that she was hiding something. I hired a private investigator, and what he uncovered was far worse than I imagined. She had been having an affair with David Mercer, a man I had trusted as a colleague, even a friend. It wasn't just the affair that crushed me. It was her plans to ruin me financially. Claire and David were conspiring to take everything I had worked for, to leave me destitute. Their scheme involved shady business deals, and Claire had been siphoning off funds from my company for months. The betrayal was deep, layered, and twisted. But instead of acting in the heat of anger, I plotted my revenge carefully, methodically. I knew Claire too well. Her vanity was her weakness. She believed herself untouchable, clever, above reproach. She thought she could get away with everything, just as David Mercer did. They both underestimated me. First, I started by putting the pieces together. Every email, every document, every transaction. I enlisted the help of a lawyer who specialized in corporate fraud and divorce cases. Together, we built a case so airtight that not even the most skilled lawyer could wriggle out of it. But I wasn't interested in exposing her right away. No, I wanted to get under her skin. I needed to make sure she was confident, even cocky in her deceit, before pulling the rug out from under her. I played the long game. I began withdrawing from her emotionally, making her believe that I was in denial, that I was willing to turn a blind eye to her affair. She thought I was weak, that I'd never confront her. Meanwhile, I set a trap, one that would expose her affair in the most public, humiliating way possible. The trap was simple but devastating. I invited both Claire and David to a business dinner under the guise of trying to reconcile and make a deal. It was the perfect setting. A high-end restaurant, private room, the right amount of wine to loosen tongues. I had prepared everything in advance. My lawyer was there, waiting. Hidden cameras were strategically placed around the room. As the night wore on, I let them think they were in control. Claire was her usual self, charming, disarming, and playing the victim. David Mercer, arrogant and self-assured, thought he was untouchable, smug in his position of power. That was when I made my move. With the flick of a switch, the video recordings of Claire's and David's incriminating conversations began to play. I had arranged for the footage to be projected onto the wall behind me. The images were shocking. Claire and David discussing their affair in graphic detail. How they had plotted to ruin me, how they had laughed about the money they were siphoning from my business. Every word, every look, captured in high definition for all to see. The look on Claire's face was one of pure terror. David Mercer, for the first time, was speechless. They both realized far too late that they had miscalculated. The room grew tense. Claire's usual composure crumbled. She tried to stammer an explanation, but the evidence spoke louder than her words. But I wasn't done. I stood up and, with a calmness that made everything more chilling, I announced to both of them, "You thought you could ruin me, but I'm the one who's been controlling the game all along." The dinner that was supposed to seal their victory ended up sealing their fate. The shock of what they had seen on the screen would never leave them. In the months that followed, Claire's reputation crumbled. The affair was made public, the financial fraud exposed, and the legal ramifications were brutal. She lost her position in the company, her social standing, and every ounce of respect. David Mercer wasn't spared either. He lost his job, his wealth, and was left to rebuild his life from the ashes of his own arrogance. As for me, I stood taller than I had in years. The divorce was swift. The financial ruin Claire had hoped for me never came to pass. In fact, it was her who ended up paying the price, not just in money, but in her own sense of dignity. which I'd taken with one strategic move. My revenge was perfect, slowly unfolding, carefully planned, and executed with precision. But the surprise? It wasn't just their fall from grace. It was the unexpected twist that came when I found out that Claire's betrayal had been set in motion long before I suspected. The truth was darker than I could have imagined. She wasn't the mastermind. She was the pawn in a much bigger game. David. Mercer had been the one pulling the strings all along. And as I watched him crumble, I realized that my revenge was just the beginning of something far more dangerous and complex. The months that followed Claire's public downfall were not filled with the peace I expected. The moment her reputation shattered, I felt a flicker of triumph, but it quickly faded into something darker. I had won, yes, but the price of that victory was a gnawing emptiness, a feeling of loss I hadn't anticipated. The divorce settlement was swift, as if she were eager to escape me, to erase the reminder of her own defeat. But there was still something unresolved, something that tugged at my mind every night when the house was silent. David Mercer had been the true architect of everything. While Claire had played the part of the seductress, he had been the mastermind, pulling her strings like a marionette. I thought I had extracted my revenge on Claire, but David, his arrogance, his sense of invincibility, had let him walk away, without facing the full consequences. That had to change. I couldn't let it end with him unscathed. He had destroyed my life, manipulated Claire into betraying me, and sabotaged everything I had worked for. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power, his power over people, over me. I had to strip that away, make him feel the terror of losing control, as I had. I began my investigation into David Mercer's life with the same calculated precision I had used on Claire. He was, after all, a man of habits, and it didn't take long for me to learn his weaknesses. His empire of influence rested on his connections, his business dealings, and his reputation as a high-powered CEO. I had to break that, and I knew just how to do it. I reached out to the very people David had ruthlessly betrayed in the past, the ones he had discarded once they outlived their usefulness. They were easy to find, surprisingly open to speaking about their experiences, and many of them had grievances that had been buried for years. It was time to expose the real David Mercer, the man behind the corporate mask. I started gathering evidence, old emails, records of backdoor deals, insider trading, and testimonies from former employees. Each piece was a nail in his coffin, slowly tightening the noose around his neck. And as I delved deeper into his life, I uncovered a series of shady connections with politicians, mobsters, and corrupt officials. David wasn't just a corporate shark. He was a criminal. His wealth had been built on exploitation, manipulation, and violence. But I didn't want to just bring him down. I wanted to watch him squirm. I planted stories about him, ones that were just truthful enough to cast doubt on his credibility. I had his former partners, who knew the darkest corners of his dealings, speak anonymously to journalists. As the public began to whisper about his shady business practices, David's empire began to crumble. He lost deals, investors pulled out, and his board started questioning his leadership. Still, that wasn't enough. I had to hit him where it hurt the most. It came to me one night when I was alone in my study, reviewing the last set of documents I had gathered. A former colleague of David's, a man who had been pushed out years ago, had a story that would make everything fall apart. David had a hidden stash of funds, money that no one knew about, invested in a series of offshore accounts. And not only that, David had been laundering money through his personal company, using his legal firm as a front. It was the final piece of the puzzle. With this, I made my move. I sent the information anonymously to the authorities, to the media, and to the investors David had betrayed. The floodgates opened, and within a week, the walls of his empire began to collapse. The authorities began an investigation into his criminal activities. His company was seized by the government, and his assets were frozen. His once powerful allies distanced themselves, and the world watched as the mighty David Mercer was dragged into the mud. But it wasn't just his business that was ruined. David's personal life shattered too. I had made sure that every aspect of his scandalous behavior, his manipulation of people, and his corruption was laid bare for his wife and children to see. His public humiliation was complete. The man who had once walked around with the arrogance of a king was now a broken man, a shell of his former self. I watched all of this unfold, but something inside me shifted. The satisfaction I thought I would feel, the elation of watching him fall, wasn't there. Instead, I felt something far colder: emptiness. I had destroyed everything he had, everything he valued, and yet I didn't feel the triumph I expected. In the quiet aftermath of my revenge, I finally understood. The pain of betrayal, the deep ache of being discarded and manipulated didn't vanish when they fell. It didn't disappear when the world knew the truth. I realized that revenge, no matter how carefully planned, doesn't fill the void it leaves behind. I had gotten everything I wanted, but in the process, I had lost something too. After the dinner where Claire's betrayal was exposed, I thought I had seen the last of her lies. The affair with David Mercer, the financial sabotage, everything came crashing down in front of her. But there was something unsettling about the way she reacted. Her panic, the desperate way she tried to explain herself, left me with a nagging feeling that there was more to the story. Claire had always been a master of manipulation, a woman who knew how to turn the tables in her favor. I had seen it before, countless times. Her ability to twist the narrative, to frame herself as the victim even when she was the one who had wronged me. I wasn't willing to take her word for anything anymore. That's when I made the decision to hire a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but someone who specialized in corporate fraud, infidelity, and hidden assets. I needed a professional who could dig deeper into Claire's life and uncover every last secret she had been hiding from me. The thought of her getting away with anything, slipping through the cracks once again, was unacceptable. Her betrayal wasn't just an affair. It was an intricate, calculated plan, one that stretched far beyond her infidelity. Claire had been working with David Mercer for months, if not longer, to destroy me financially, to take my company from me, and to ruin my future. I had seen the betrayal in her eyes, but I still couldn't fathom the full extent of it. A part of me wanted to know everything, every detail, every lie she had woven into the web of deceit that had ensnared me. I hired Vincent Hale, a seasoned attorney who had a reputation for being thorough and relentless. He was the kind of man who could follow a trail of breadcrumbs until it led to a buried treasure, or in this case, to a woman's darkest secrets. The moment I hired him, he went to work. Vincent started with the basics: Claire's phone records, credit card statements, and social media accounts. He had a team of investigators who specialized in digital forensics, and they quickly uncovered patterns in Claire's spending, conversations, and travel that I had never noticed before. She had been meticulous, planning each affair, each financial transaction, each hidden trip. Vincent also dug into David Mercer's life, trying to understand the full scope of their conspiracy. What he found was both shocking and horrifying. Claire's affair with Mercer had been carefully timed with my business trips, as though she had planned to keep me out of town while she executed their schemes. The money she had been siphoning from my accounts wasn't just for her personal gain. It was to fund Mercer's shady investments and, worse, to pay off people who could help her get away with everything. Vincent discovered that Claire had been transferring funds to accounts in other countries, setting up shell companies under fake names. It wasn't just a betrayal of my heart. It was an orchestrated attack on everything I had built. But there was one piece of evidence that Vincent uncovered that hit me like a punch to the gut. Hidden deep in Claire's email archives, We found a thread of correspondence between her and Mercer that outlined the entire plan. They had been working together to position me as a scapegoat in a financial scandal, one that would destroy my reputation and leave me vulnerable to legal action. Claire had even discussed how she would manipulate my emotional state, play the role of the loving wife, the victim, so that when the truth came out, she would come out smelling like roses, while I would be left to clean up the mess they had created. I thought I knew everything about Claire. I thought I had seen the worst of her. But this was a level of manipulation and coldness I had never imagined. Vincent and I met in his office, the legal papers spread across the desk. "I'm afraid there's more to the story than we anticipated," he said, his voice grim. This wasn't just about an affair, or even a financial grab. Claire and Mercer had a plan, a well-laid one, to dismantle your life. They thought they could control the narrative and walk away unscathed. But we've got them now, and I can assure you, we'll make sure they pay for everything they've done. I nodded, feeling a rush of anger rise within me. Claire hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She had taken everything I valued and tried to destroy it. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not this time. Together, Vincent and I devised a strategy to expose Claire and Mercer. We had the evidence. Now it was time to make them face the consequences of their actions. First, we would confront Claire with everything we knew. We would make her understand that no matter how much she tried to control the situation, she could not escape the truth. Then we would go public with the full extent of her betrayal. The financial fraud, the affair, the manipulation, it would all come to light, and there would be no place for her to hide. But I wasn't done with her yet. As the days passed, my sense of purpose hardened. The weight of what Claire had done was still fresh in my mind, but now I had a plan, a clear path forward. Vincent Hale had become my ally, a man who understood the stakes. We weren't just going after Claire's affair anymore. We were uncovering the entire conspiracy she had orchestrated, and with each step, the truth became darker and more complex. Claire had thought she could manipulate everything around her, but she had underestimated me. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, about making sure the damage she had done would not go unpunished. Vincent and his team dove deeper into Claire's life, scrutinizing everything from her financial transactions to her relationships with David Mercer and even her social circle. There were things she had done under the radar that I hadn't even begun to suspect. Every piece of evidence pulled us further into her world of deception, where the lines between betrayal and ambition blurred. One of the more shocking discoveries involved a series of encrypted emails between Claire and a high-profile business tycoon, someone I had known as a colleague. The exchanges were disturbingly friendly, and in them, Claire hinted at plans for a future together, one where she would abandon me and take control of a new empire. It was clear she had been playing both sides, leading me to believe I was the victim of a simple affair, while she worked on securing her future with Mercer and this mysterious figure. But what really shook me to the core was an email Claire had sent to Mercer just weeks before the affair was exposed. She outlined their final play, a detailed plan to use me as a scapegoat in a corporate scandal that would have ruined my career and left me financially ruined. The scheme involved planting false documents, diverting funds, and creating fake evidence that would have led to me being investigated for embezzlement. If they had pulled it off, I would have lost everything: my business, my reputation, my future. Claire had planned to be the grieving wife in the aftermath, the woman who had been betrayed by her cheating husband, while she walked away with a fortune and a new life with Mercer. This wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a calculated, vicious attack on everything I had worked for, and Claire had been at the center of it all. I sat in Vincent's office, the weight of the evidence before me, feeling the anger boil up again. This wasn't just about the lies. Claire had told me. This was a full-on assault. She had used me as a pawn in a game that would have destroyed me. But she had left something out. She underestimated my resilience. Vincent leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. You have to understand, this isn't just a betrayal of you. It's a betrayal of everything she's ever claimed to stand for. This isn't just about money or affairs. It's about power. She and Mercer were going to leave you with nothing, and in the end, they would have gotten away with it. But now we have the evidence to bring them down. I nodded, my mind racing. What's the next step? We'll start by confronting her, Vincent said, his voice calm but full of resolve. We'll lay it all out for her, every document, every email, every financial transaction. She can't deny it. Then we go public. We make sure the world knows who Claire really is and what she and Mercer have been planning. The confrontation with Claire would be the turning point. I knew she would try to twist things, to make me seem like the villain, but I had the upper hand now. The power had shifted, and it was time for her to face the consequences. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a private room in a hotel downtown. I wanted to keep it controlled without any distractions. Vincent would be there, and we would bring the evidence to Claire. No more lies, no more manipulation. The truth would be exposed, and she would have nowhere to hide. The night of the meeting, my nerves were strangely calm. It wasn't fear I felt. It was certainty. I had spent months following the breadcrumbs, putting together the pieces, and now the moment of reckoning had arrived. Claire walked in, her usual air of confidence in place, as if she were about to sit down for a casual conversation. She didn't know it yet, but the life she had built on lies was about to collapse. "Hello, Claire," I said, my voice steady. "I hope you're ready for a conversation about the truth." Her eyes flickered briefly, but she quickly masked her surprise with a smile. "What's this about exactly? Is this some kind of reconciliation?" "Hardly," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "It's about everything you've been hiding from me. The affair, the money, the lies, the manipulation. It's all here. Claire, every last detail." I slid the stack of documents across the table, letting her take in the weight of the evidence. The investigation into Claire's betrayal had brought me to the edge of a precipice I hadn't anticipated. The affair with David Mercer, the web of lies, and the financial sabotage were devastating. But as the layers peeled away, I realized that Claire wasn't the only one who had been playing games. There were darker forces at work, forces that had been lying to me, manipulating me, and using me as a pawn in their grander schemes. One of those forces was my business partner, Ethan. Ethan and I had built our company from the ground up. We had shared late nights, brainstorming sessions, and a mutual understanding of how much we depended on one another. I had trusted him like a brother. But as I began to dig into Claire's web of deceit, I couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan was more involved than I had ever imagined. There had been odd things, small signs that I had brushed off: his coldness in recent months, his constant evasions when I asked about Claire, and the strange behavior whenever we discussed the company's future. But those were just hints. I needed hard evidence. Vincent and his team had already uncovered Claire's manipulations, but I needed to know if Ethan had been a part of it. I couldn't risk exposing everything without understanding the full scope of the betrayal. If Ethan had been complicit in Claire's scheme, then the depth of the treachery would be beyond anything I could have imagined. It was time to turn the investigation toward him. I began by analyzing our company's financial records. Ethan had always handled the day-to-day operations, the bookkeeping, and the budgeting, while I focused on the bigger picture: strategy, innovation, and partnerships. In the past, we had been a perfect team. But now, I realized how easily he could have hidden his tracks if he wanted to. Vincent's team scoured through the financial documents, looking for any signs of irregularities, any subtle discrepancies in our accounts that could point to a larger scheme. What we found was more than I had expected. Ethan had been funneling company funds into an offshore account, an account linked to an anonymous investor who, as I later discovered, was connected to David Mercer. The transactions were clean on the surface, but the more Vincent and his team dug, the clearer it became that these transfers were designed to hide something much darker. It wasn't just money being siphoned off. It was a well-constructed plan to divest our company's assets slowly, to bleed it dry without anyone noticing. But the money wasn't the only thing Ethan had been hiding. I started going through the email archives, combing through every conversation. That involved Ethan and Claire, as well as the ones between Ethan and Mercer. The more I read, the clearer the picture became. There were discussions about redirecting investments, about undermining my authority in meetings, and even about sabotaging the projects I was most passionate about. Ethan had been playing both sides all along, using his position as my trusted business partner to build an alliance with David Mercer and Claire. They had been working together to take me down from the inside, to weaken the company so that they could swoop in and take control. One email in particular caught my eye. It was from Ethan to Claire, written just days before the affair was exposed. It was a cryptic message discussing the next steps in their plan. The final phase is almost here. We'll need to accelerate the shifts in the budget and plant the seeds for the upcoming scandal. Once the board starts questioning his decisions, it'll all fall apart. After that, we just need to keep the pressure on until he breaks. Mercer's already lined up the investors to take over the company. I'll make sure the foundation crumbles from within. The plan was far more calculated than I had ever imagined. Ethan, my trusted partner, had been playing me like a fool, working in tandem with Claire and Mercer to bring down everything I had built. My blood ran cold as I pieced it all together. Claire's affair had been just the surface of something much deeper, a conspiracy to rob me of everything I had worked for. Ethan wasn't just a bystander in this betrayal. He had been a key player, orchestrating a slow and steady dismantling of the company I had poured my life into. I had trusted him. I had trusted both of them. The realization hit me like a freight train. Ethan wasn't just a traitor to me. He had been plotting to destroy me for months, if not longer. I couldn't just confront him right away. I had to be strategic. I had to expose him, just as I had done with Claire. But this time, I had to be more careful. Ethan knew the company inside and out, and if he suspected I was onto him, he would try to cover his tracks. I contacted Vincent immediately, and we set up a plan to catch Ethan in the act. We knew he wouldn't just admit to his involvement in everything without some serious pressure. As the evidence piled up and the truth unfolded, I couldn't help but notice how Ethan's demeanor shifted. The cocky, self-assured man I had once trusted was gone. In his place was someone unrecognizable, a shell of the partner I had once shared victories with. His arrogance, which had always been a constant in our business dealings, had evaporated into a deep, unspoken regret. And it was in that moment, as he sat across from me, trying to explain himself, that I saw the depths of his regret. I never meant for it to go this far, he stammered, his voice trembling. His eyes flickered nervously between the documents and me. I didn't want this. I didn't think it would turn into all of this. It was almost pathetic. His attempt to downplay the severity of his actions, as if trying to distance himself from the betrayal he had helped orchestrate. You didn't think it would go this far? I repeated, leaning forward, letting my anger simmer just beneath the surface. What exactly did you think was going to happen when you and Claire started plotting against me? Did you think it would just be business as usual once I lost everything? Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting toward the door, as if looking for a way out. But there was no escape. He had done what he had done, and no amount of regret or self-pity could undo the damage. I was blinded by her, he said, finally, his voice barely a whisper, as though admitting something even darker. I thought she was the answer to everything. She promised me a way out, a way to escape what I was stuck in. She said I could have everything, everything I ever wanted. And you thought betraying me would give you that? I couldn't. keep the venom out of my voice. You were my partner, my friend, and you destroyed that. You destroyed everything we built, everything I worked for because of a woman who's been playing both of us like fools. Ethan's face twisted, guilt flooding his features. I thought she loved me, he muttered, almost as if trying to convince himself. I didn't think she was capable of doing what she did. I was stupid. The weight of his words hung in the air like a thick fog. He wasn't just regretting the affair now. He was regretting everything that had led up to it. The realization that Claire hadn't loved him, that she had only used him to further her own selfish goals, had finally settled into his conscience. She never loved you, Ethan, I said coldly. She used you to get what she wanted, and you were too blind to see it. Now look at us. Look at what you've done. His hands clenched into fists on the table, and I saw the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between guilt and anger. I can't undo it, he admitted, his voice breaking. But I regret it. I regret ever getting involved with her. I thought I was doing the right thing, but now it's all falling apart. I'm losing everything. I watched him carefully, trying to gauge whether there was any sincerity behind his words, whether his regret was genuine or just a last-ditch attempt to salvage whatever dignity he had left. Do you even realize what you've done? I said, my voice low but steady. You've betrayed me, your business, your trust, and now you've ruined your own life. You've been played by a woman who had no intention of being with you. She was always using you to further her own agenda. She never cared about you. Ethan's face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw the rawness of his regret. The mask of the confident businessman was gone, replaced by a man who finally realized the enormity of his mistake. I thought she was different, he whispered, almost to himself. I thought she really cared about me. But now I see that. I was just another pawn to her. His voice cracked, and I could hear the weight of his realization in every word. I thought she'd help me, help us, but now it's all gone. Everything's gone. I watched him closely, feeling a mix of anger and pity, anger for the betrayal, and pity for the man who had been so blinded by desire and ambition that he had lost everything that mattered. You think this is about you, Ethan? I said, my voice rising. This isn't about you or your damn feelings. It's about everything you've taken from me, everything you've tried to destroy. This isn't some personal tragedy for you to wallow in. This is my life. He looked up at me then, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and fear. I know. I don't deserve any sympathy, and I'm not asking for it. I didn't realize what I was getting into. I didn't know what she was capable of until it was too late. The irony of it was almost unbearable. Ethan had been so focused on his own desires, so blinded by Claire's promises, that he had never seen the bigger picture. Now, as the truth came crashing down around him, he finally understood the cost of his actions. But it was too late for apologies, too late for regrets. As I walked out of that meeting, the weight of everything that had unfolded began to settle into my bones. The confrontation with Ethan had been necessary, but it had also left me with a deep, bitter taste of satisfaction. He regretted his actions, but that regret couldn't undo the betrayal. Claire's deception and his treachery were two sides of the same coin, tangled, destructive, and irrevocable. But as I left that sterile meeting room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't done. No, not by a long shot. They thought they could destroy my life, take everything from me, and walk away unscathed. Claire and Ethan believed that their manipulations would go unnoticed, that their betrayal would be a quiet, personal wound. What they hadn't accounted for was my resolve. I had been playing the long game, collecting evidence, assembling pieces of their twisted puzzle. Now it was time to bring the full force of my revenge down on them. The revenge would be cold, calculated, and devastating, Because when someone takes everything from you, the only thing left to do is make them feel the weight of their actions. And I wasn't going to just expose them. I was going to make them regret every second of their lives that they'd spent plotting against me. I called Vincent as soon as I left the building. I needed his expertise, his connections. If I was going to make sure that Claire and Ethan suffered for what they had done, I needed to ensure their downfall was as public and crushing as possible. "We've got everything we need," I said. When he answered, my voice steady. "The financial records, the emails, the plans, they're all in place. I want to hit them where it hurts the most." Vincent's voice was calm but tinged with anticipation. "I'm with you. What's the next move?" I knew what needed to be done. I wasn't just going to ruin their reputation or expose their crimes in a way that would make them regret it privately. No, I was going to destroy their credibility, their standing in the business world, and their lives. They had tried to tear apart everything I had worked for, and now it was time for them to feel the full weight of their betrayal. "I'm going to take everything from them," I said, a fire burning behind my words. "Let's leak the information. Let's show everyone what they've been doing behind the scenes. I want their names dragged through the mud. I want their personal lives destroyed in the public eye. I want them to realize that their ambition, their greed, and their lies weren't worth the price they'll now pay." Vincent paused for a moment, likely processing the gravity of my words. "Then," he responded, his tone full of resolve, "it's done. I'll handle the details. We'll make sure it's a controlled release, timed perfectly, and we'll make sure they can't spin it, can't hide from it. Their downfall will be as spectacular as it is unavoidable." The plan was set into motion. We began with Claire. The affair, the financial sabotage, the scheming with Mercer, it was all too much to ignore. But I wasn't just going to send this information to a few trusted individuals or media outlets. No. I had a more calculated approach in mind. I leaked the details of her affair with Ethan and her plot to ruin my company to a powerful business insider. Someone who would know how to turn it into a public spectacle. Someone with connections that would make sure this went viral. Simultaneously, Vincent made sure the legal ramifications were set in motion. I contacted the board of directors, those who had still held any belief in Claire's integrity, and dropped the bombshell. Her plan to destroy me wasn't just an affair. It was a full-blown conspiracy. It was more than just cheating. It was an attempt to ruin my life, my career, and my reputation. She and Ethan had plotted against me for months, draining resources, sabotaging my company, and lining their own pockets. And then there was David Mercer, the businessman who thought he could stay behind the scenes and pull the strings from afar. I wasn't going to let him slide by untouched. I made sure to include the information about his financial ties with Claire and Ethan. The affair was just a small part of the picture. Mercer had been involved in the scheme to take control of my company using Claire as his pawn. When the full scope of their manipulation came to light, there would be no way for Mercer to save face or maintain his reputation. The first leak hit like a tidal wave. A well-known financial journalist published an exposé on Claire, revealing her affair, her involvement in the embezzlement of company funds, and her plan to take me down. The article spread like wildfire, and soon the media picked up the story. As more and more details emerged, the world began to see Claire for what she truly was. A manipulative, calculating woman who had been playing everyone around her for her own gain, but that was just the beginning. The legal actions followed, and soon, after I made the difficult decision to hire a lawyer, everything changed. I had known the truth in my gut for a long time, but now I needed something concrete, something undeniable. The lawyer I hired was no amateur. He was a seasoned professional, with a reputation for handling delicate and high-stakes cases. His name was Aaron Grayson, and he was known for his meticulous attention to detail and his ability to uncover the most well-hidden secrets. I met Aaron in a dimly lit office, tucked away in a corner of the city that seemed as unassuming as the work he did. He didn't waste time with pleasantries, not that I wanted any. I was done with niceties. I needed answers. "I understand your situation," he said, his voice low and steady, as he leaned back in his chair, studying me. "But I need to know exactly what you want to find. What is it that you're looking for?" I hesitated, gathering the fragments of my emotions that had been swirling in my chest for months. It had been so hard to admit that my marriage was a lie, that Claire, the woman I had shared my life with, built a future with, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. But now I was here, determined to take action. "I need to know who she's been seeing," I said firmly. "I need evidence, proof, that she's been unfaithful. I don't care about the details. I just need to know the truth, and I need it fast." Aaron's expression softened slightly, but he nodded. "You'll get your proof. But remember, when we dig into this, there's no turning back. You'll know everything, even the things you might not want to hear." I nodded back, resolute. "I'm ready." The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and waiting. Aaron set up surveillance, hired investigators to follow Claire, and began gathering information from sources I never even thought to consider. He was thorough, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of cold satisfaction as I knew the walls were closing in on her. She had been living a lie, and I would be the one to expose it. I kept busy with my own work, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy in my life, but the constant feeling of dread never left me. Every phone call, every text from Aaron had the potential to change everything. But as the days passed, it became clear that Claire was slipping up. The surveillance team had caught her meeting with a man, someone I didn't recognize. They had a dinner date at a secluded restaurant, their body language too intimate for a simple friendship. The photos were clear. There was no denying it. She had been lying to me for months. When Aaron finally called to meet me again, I knew what was coming. This was the moment when everything would be laid out on the table. We sat across from each other in the same dimly lit office. Aaron slid a thick folder toward me, the weight of it palpable. He didn't say anything at first, just let me absorb the gravity of the situation. "Here's what we found," he began, his tone clinical. "I have images of Claire and this man. His name is Ethan Calloway, a business associate of yours, meeting multiple times. This isn't just a fling. There's something deeper going on here." I opened the folder, and the photographs staring back at me made my stomach twist. Claire and Ethan, laughing together at a cafe, leaning in close, her hand resting on his arm. Another photo showed them exiting a hotel together, both looking disheveled, clearly having spent the night. The betrayal was undeniable. I slammed the folder shut, the anger welling up inside me like a storm ready to break. "You're telling me this man has been having an affair with your wife?" "Yes," Aaron interrupted, his voice steady. "And it's been going on for months. He's not just some one-night thing. They've been plotting together something much larger than just a relationship." My heart sank, and I tried to steady my breath. The shock of it all was overwhelming. I had suspected something, but this was worse than I could have imagined. Ethan, my trusted business partner, had been betraying me in more ways than one. "Ethan's involvement is critical," Aaron continued. "It's not just personal, it's business. There are documents, emails, proof of an agreement between them to undermine your company. It looks like they were planning to force you out of the business and take control. They've been working together to manipulate you financially, emotionally, and professionally." My mind was reeling. Claire and Ethan hadn't just been cheating, they had been conspiring to ruin everything I had built. My company, my life, everything I cared about was being methodically dismantled by two people I trusted. "I want them exposed," I said, my voice a mixture of fury and cold determination. "I want everyone to know what they've done. I want to hit them where it hurts most. Make sure everyone knows about this." Aaron nodded. "I'll take care of it. We'll release the evidence." to the right people, make sure it gets to the press. The truth had shattered me, but it also ignited something deeper within me, something I hadn't felt in years. The old version of me, the man who trusted blindly and let things slide, was gone. In his place stood someone new, a man who would no longer tolerate betrayal, who would not allow those who sought to destroy him to walk away unscathed. I spent the next few days planning. Every move had to be calculated. I couldn't rush this. Revenge wasn't about burning everything to the ground in a fit of rage. It was about precision, patience, and making sure that Claire and Ethan suffered for their treachery in the way that would hit them hardest, emotionally, financially, and professionally. First, I focused on Claire. She would be the primary target, and everything I did would be geared toward making her life as public and painful as possible. The affair was just the beginning. She had been involved in an intricate web of lies, deceit, and financial scheming that I was now ready to unravel. The surveillance footage, the emails, the secret meetings with Ethan, they were damning. But it wasn't enough to just expose them. That would be too easy. I needed to do something that would ensure their worlds were turned upside down, something that would make it impossible for them to deny or recover from the consequences. I reached out to a few select contacts I had in the media world, people who owed me favors, people who would be eager to dig into Claire's past. They would uncover not just the affair, but her entire manipulation of our financial dealings. The documents Aaron had found, proof that she had been siphoning money from the business, using her position to funnel funds to herself and Ethan, those would be the key. While the media worked behind the scenes, I had to make sure that Ethan was cornered as well. He wasn't just a fool in love, he was a man who had tried to use me, tried to take everything from me. I needed to make sure that his role in this wasn't just exposed, it was obliterated. I took the evidence that Aaron had gathered on Ethan's financial dealings, his secret communications with Claire, their plans to undermine my company, and I passed it on to a trusted lawyer. I wasn't just going to ruin his personal life, I was going to ruin his career. Ethan's business empire had been built on manipulation and deceit. Now it was time for him to face the legal consequences of his actions. I wanted to make sure that Ethan would never be able to recover. He would lose everything, his wealth, his reputation, his career, just as I had nearly lost everything because of him. But the final step was the confrontation with Claire. I had to see her face to face. I needed her to know that I knew everything, that I had nothing left to lose, and that her attempts to destroy me had failed. I set up a meeting at a quiet cafe, one that we had frequented early in our relationship. The location wasn't an accident. I wanted to make her feel the weight of nostalgia, the memories of a time when everything seemed perfect between us. When she walked in, her eyes scanned the room, but I could see the moment of recognition. She knew I'd found out. Her posture stiffened, and she tried to play it cool, but I could see the guilt written all over her face. "Sit down, Claire," I said, my voice calm, betraying none of the anger that simmered underneath. She hesitated, then slowly took a seat across from me. "What's this about?" she asked, trying to sound nonchalant, but her voice cracked at the edges. "You know what it's about," I said flatly. I pushed the folder of documents I'd been carrying across the table toward her. Inside were pictures of her and Ethan, photos of their meetings, their stolen moments, evidence of their betrayal. Her eyes flickered to the folder, then back to me, but she didn't speak. I could tell she was trying to maintain control, trying to figure out what to say, but there was nothing she could say. It was too late for excuses. "I have everything, Claire," I continued, my voice steady. "Every email, every meeting, every phone call. You thought you could get away with this. Thought you could destroy everything I've worked for and walk away without consequences. But you're wrong. I'm not just going to expose you. I'm going to make sure you never recover." Her face, drained of color, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. It was a small victory, but it felt sweet. She was no longer the woman who had manipulated me. Now she was the one who was powerless, who was cornered by her own lies. "You're not going to get away with this," I said quietly, leaning in slightly. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you've been doing. Not just your affair, but the financial schemes, the lies, everything. You'll lose everything. Your reputation, your connections, your career, it's all over." She looked at me, the shock on her face slowly giving way to something else, something darker, something desperate. "You can't do this," she whispered. The aftermath of everything that had transpired felt almost surreal. The media storm had blown over, but its effects were far from fading. Claire and Ethan had been exposed, their dirty secrets laid bare for the world to see, and the public fallout was immense. The once powerful figures in the business world who had surrounded Claire had turned their backs on her, distancing themselves as fast as they could. Her name was tarnished, her reputation ruined, and she had nowhere to hide. Ethan, too, was feeling the sting of his betrayal. His company, once a thriving business, had begun to unravel. Investors pulled out in droves, and his partners abandoned him. Legal action continued to mount against him, and the charges of financial malfeasance, which had once seemed like minor offenses, now had the potential to destroy his life. The picture-perfect world they had tried to build for themselves, based on deceit and manipulation, had come crashing down around them. The consequences were unavoidable, irreversible. But as much as I reveled in their downfall, I couldn't deny that something within me still felt hollow. The revenge, as satisfying as it had been, hadn't brought the peace I had hoped for. I had watched them suffer, seen their world burn, but it didn't heal the gaping wound their betrayal had left inside me. No amount of punishment would erase the hurt, the betrayal, the years I had lost to their lies. There was one thing left to do, the final act that would allow me to fully sever the ties, not just with Claire and Ethan, but with the past that had haunted me for so long. I needed to take back control of my life, to ensure that I would never be defined by their actions again. I'd set it all up meticulously, the meeting with my lawyer, the final paperwork for the divorce. The legal battle had been grueling, but now it was time to seal the deal. The last of the financial entanglements were being sorted, the final assets distributed, and the remainder of Claire's once pristine world would be reduced to dust. But I couldn't just walk away. No, I needed something more than a divorce settlement and financial compensation. I needed closure, something that would release me from the ghosts of the past and finally allow me to leave them behind. I arranged for one last confrontation with Claire. This time, there would be no manipulation, no games, no lies. The meeting was set at a small, quiet office, a neutral ground. She walked in, her face pale, her eyes shadowed with regret. She had already lost everything, her status, her position, her dignity. But she still held a small shred of pride, a remnant of the woman I had once loved. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, her voice tentative, though tinged with the arrogance that had once been her trademark. I didn't waste time. "I'm done, Claire," I said simply. "I'm done with you. I'm done with everything you've put me through. I'm not doing this for revenge anymore. This isn't about punishing you for what you did. This is about me taking back what's mine, my peace, my life, and my future, and you're no longer a part of it." She blinked, and for a moment, her face showed a flicker of something, fear, realization, maybe even regret. But that moment passed quickly, and the mask of defiance returned. "You think you've won, don't you?" she said, her voice strained. "You think this is over, but it's not. You can't just erase me from your life." "I'm not trying to erase you," I replied, my voice cold and steady. "You're already gone. You just don't know it, yet. And neither does Ethan. There was silence between us, a thick, heavy silence that spoke volumes. Claire had no response, because there was nothing left to say. We had both played our parts, and now we were living the consequences of our choices. There was no turning back for either of us. I reached across the table and slid the divorce papers toward her. Sign these, and it's over. No more games. No more lies. You're free to live whatever life you have left, but I won't be a part of it. She stared at the papers for a long time, her hand trembling slightly as she picked up the pen. But she signed them without a word, her eyes never leaving mine. The finality of it all hit me in a way I hadn't expected. This was it, the end of a chapter that had defined my life for so long. As she left the office, walking away from the life we had built together, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of detachment. I had won. I had gotten my revenge, and I had taken back control of my future. But there was no joy in it, no satisfaction that lasted, only a quiet, numbing emptiness. I had done what I set out to do. I had made sure Claire and Ethan paid for what they had done. But in the end, I realized that revenge had never been the true goal. It was closure I had sought. It was the final act of reclaiming my own life, free from the poison of their betrayal. And now, as the weight of everything lifted, the weeks following the divorce were a blur. The immediate aftermath of the legal proceedings had left me feeling strangely numb, as if the reality of it all hadn't fully sunk in. Claire and Ethan were no longer my concern, and yet I couldn't shake the lingering sense of disillusionment. I had gotten my revenge. Everything I had meticulously planned had come to fruition. But somehow, the relief I expected wasn't as sharp or satisfying as I had hoped. I began to realize that the real battle hadn't been with them. It had been with myself. For so long, I had been consumed by anger, by the need to make them pay. The betrayal had ignited a fire inside me, one that had pushed me forward, driven me to meticulously unravel their lies and destroy everything they held dear. But now, with the dust settling and the revenge completed, I was left to confront the emptiness I had tried to ignore. The days grew quieter, and I found myself spending more time reflecting on the years that had led me to this point. The life I had shared with Claire had once felt so certain. We had built it together, our home, our future, our plans. But that future had been nothing but a mirage, and the truth had shattered it all. I couldn't ignore the fact that I had lost so much more than just Claire and Ethan. I had lost a part of myself in the process, the part of me that had believed in love, in trust, in the idea that people could change. I decided it was time to focus on rebuilding, on putting the pieces of my life back together. But this time, I wouldn't rely on anyone else. I had learned the hard way that people could betray you in the most intimate, damaging ways. No one would ever have that kind of power over me again. I threw myself into work, redirecting all my energy into the company. It had been a lifeline during the darkest parts of the betrayal, and now it felt like the one thing I could truly control. I made decisions that were bold and at times ruthless, but they felt necessary. The company was thriving, and I began to reconnect with old colleagues and friends, people I had distanced myself from in the wake of everything. They welcomed me back, and slowly, I started to rebuild the network I had once been part of. But even in the midst of my professional success, there was something missing. I began to realize that the path I had been on, of vengeance and self-destruction, was never going to bring me true peace. I had spent so much time focusing on making them suffer that I hadn't given myself the space to heal. I hadn't allowed myself to move on. It was during a quiet evening after another long day of meetings that I finally understood what I needed to do. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of what Claire and Ethan had done to me. It was time to let go. Not just of them, but of the version of myself that had been consumed by revenge. I needed to find the man I used to be, the one who believed in second chances, the one who had loved deeply, the one who still had hope that there was more to life than betrayal. I made a decision. It was time to move away. I didn't want to. Stay in the city where the memories of Claire and Ethan still haunted every corner, every street. I needed a fresh start, a place where I could forge a new identity and leave the ghosts of the past behind. I found a small town in the mountains, a quiet place far removed from the life I had known. It was a risk, but I didn't care. I sold the house, packed my things, and started over. The moment I arrived, the weight of years of pain and anger seemed to lift off my shoulders. The air was different here, cleaner, the pace slower. I could breathe. It wasn't easy at first. The temptation to look back, to check in on Claire and Ethan, to track their fall, was always there. But each day, as I settled into my new life, I realized that the less I thought about them, the more I could focus on what really mattered. Me. I started to find joy in small things again, walking in the woods, reading books that had been gathering dust, meeting new people without the fear of judgment or betrayal. I began to trust again, but in a different way, not blindly, but with an understanding that no one is perfect, and that life isn't about controlling others, but about being true to myself. Over time, I found peace. It wasn't something that came overnight. It was a slow, steady process of rebuilding, of rediscovering the man I had once been before all the pain and betrayal. And though the scars of the past would never completely fade, they became a part of who I was now, a man who had been broken, but had found the strength to put himself back together. Then one day I received a letter. It was from Claire. She had written it months after everything had fallen apart. She apologized, genuinely, it seemed, for the pain she had caused, for her part in everything that had shattered our marriage. It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't a plea for reconciliation. As the months passed, I settled into my new life with a sense of quiet contentment. The weight of the past slowly lifted with each passing day, and I grew more comfortable in the rhythms of my peaceful existence. The small town, with its slow pace and welcoming community, became my sanctuary. The world I had left behind seemed like a distant memory, one I could barely recall except in fleeting moments. There were, of course, moments when the past threatened to resurface, when the shadows of betrayal flickered in the corners of my mind, but they were becoming fewer, fading into the background as I embraced the freedom of my new life. I had let go of the anger, the desire for revenge, and I found solace in knowing that I had made the right decision to move on. One morning, as I sat at the local coffee shop, sipping my usual dark roast, I noticed someone walk in, a woman I hadn't seen before. She was strikingly beautiful, her presence calm, yet undeniably magnetic. Her eyes, warm but with a hint of sadness, met mine briefly, and I couldn't help but feel an odd connection. There was something in the way she looked at me, something familiar, though I couldn't place it. She sat at a nearby table, her laptop open in front of her. I tried to focus on my coffee, on the moment at hand, but my thoughts kept wandering back to her. After a few minutes, she glanced up from her screen and gave a small, hesitant smile, as if unsure whether to make a move. I smiled back, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the stirrings of something I hadn't felt in years. Curiosity, maybe even hope. She stood up and walked over to my table, her steps graceful, as if she had made a decision. "Hi," she said softly, her voice calm but warm. "I hope I'm not interrupting, but are you the person who just moved into the old farmhouse by the woods?" I nodded, a little taken aback by her directness. "That's me. You must be new here, too." She smiled and sat down, uninvited but in a way that felt natural. "I am," she replied. "I've been here for a couple of months now. I'm a writer, actually. I came here for some peace and quiet. Needed a fresh start. You know?" The words hit me like a wave. Fresh start. I had done the same thing. Perhaps that was why I felt drawn to her, because we shared something unspoken. An understanding of what it meant to rebuild from the ground up. "I get that," I said, setting my coffee cup down. "I came here for the same reason. Needed a change of scenery after... Well, life didn't go exactly as I'd planned." She nodded, her eyes softening. "I understand. It's hard to leave the past behind, but sometimes it's the only way forward." Her words resonated deeply with me. She was speaking not just of the physical distance, but of the emotional one, the one I had fought so hard to create. The one that had allowed me to let go of everything that had once defined me. "I'm sorry. I didn't catch your name," I said, breaking the silence that had settled between us. "Celia," she replied. "Celia Daniels." I smiled. "Nice to meet you, Celia. Well, I think I'm just figuring that out still." We both chuckled at the honesty of it, and for the first time in a long while, I felt an unexpected sense of comfort. We talked for hours that day about everything and nothing. I learned that Celia was a novelist, someone who had made a name for herself in the literary world, though she was trying to escape the pressures of city life and find inspiration in the quiet of the countryside. She had been married once, too, though it had ended much like my own, quietly and painfully, with the emotional scars that come from loving someone who isn't who they seemed. I told her little about my own past, not yet ready to open that door again, but I felt the pull to be real with her, to share the pieces of myself that I had kept hidden for so long. For once, there was no bitterness, no anger clouding my words, just the raw, unfiltered truth of where I was now. As the weeks passed, our encounters became more frequent. We met, for coffee, for walks through the woods, for shared meals at the local diner. Celia was unlike anyone I had ever known, gentle, insightful, and unafraid of the raw, uncomfortable truths that we often avoided. She never judged me for the scars I carried. She simply listened, and in doing so, she allowed me to heal in ways I hadn't known I needed. It didn't take long for me to realize that I was falling for her. Not in the frantic, desperate way I had fallen for Claire, but in a way that felt calm, steady, and real. There was no rush, no need to fill the emptiness with a temporary solution. With Celia, I felt like I could finally breathe. She was someone who understood what it meant to start over, to rebuild, and to forgive. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Celia and I stood at the edge of a small lake near the woods. As the days grew into weeks, my life with Celia became a source of solace I hadn't realized I needed. The more time we spent together, the more I recognized how different this relationship was from anything I'd experienced before. There was no pressure, no expectations of perfection. Just two people, trying to navigate life's complexities together without rushing toward any conclusion. It was liberating. One afternoon, Celia and I found ourselves at the edge of the lake again, where the sunlight filtered through the trees in warm golden streaks. The town was quiet, its peaceful hum a gentle backdrop to the simplicity of the moment. I was sitting on the same old wooden bench where we had shared our first conversation, the one where I had started to let go of the past, and now, it seemed, the place had become a symbol of my fresh start. Celia was absent-mindedly skimming a smooth stone across the water. I watched as it skipped and bounced before finally sinking, the ripples spreading outward like an echo of a thought. "Do you ever wonder," she said, her voice soft but steady, "if we're all just trying to make up for lost time?" I shifted, my gaze from the water to her. There was a deep melancholy in her eyes, a far-off look that suggested she was processing something far beyond the simplicity of the question. I think everyone has their own way of making up for things, I said, reflecting on my own journey, my own mistakes. Some of us try to fix things in ways that make sense at the time, like I did, trying to destroy everything that hurt me. But in the end, you realize that the real healing comes from inside. It's not something you can force. She nodded, thoughtfully, her fingers tracing patterns in the smooth surface of the stone she held in her hand. I spent so much of my life trying to outrun the hurt. First from my family, then from my marriage. I thought if I just kept moving, I'd outrun it all, but the truth is, you can't outrun your past, you have to face it. There was a vulnerability in her voice, something raw and open that made me feel even more connected to her. She wasn't just speaking about her own hurt. She was speaking about all of us, those of us who had been broken, betrayed, or lost, yet still sought to find meaning in the fragments of our lives. I leaned forward, feeling the weight of her words. I think that's what I've learned too, that the only way forward is through. Not around it, not over it. Through it. She turned to face me, her eyes searching mine with an intensity that made my chest tighten. You've been through a lot, haven't you? I didn't need to explain. She knew. She knew the depth of what I'd endured. The betrayals, the loss, the years of living in the shadow of regret. She didn't need the details, and neither did I. Our stories were intertwined in the way that only two people who had truly suffered could understand. I have, I said quietly, but I don't want to live in that anymore. I don't want to be defined by it. I just want peace. Celia smiled, her expression gentle, as though she had been waiting for me to reach this point. Then peace is what you'll have, she said, her voice full of quiet certainty. Because you've already found it, even if you don't realize it yet. Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, I truly believed them. I wasn't just existing anymore. I was living. I was finally free from the emotional shackles of my past, from the people who had tried to break me. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about what I could create now, what I could choose for myself. As we sat there in the stillness, the air between us was charged, not with expectation, but with a shared understanding. I could feel it, the unspoken promise that we had both given ourselves permission to start fresh, to rebuild not just our individual lives, but the possibility of something new together. There were still moments, of course, when the past crept up like an unwelcome guest. I saw it in the flash of memories, in the quiet of the night, when I would find myself alone with my thoughts. But I learned to embrace those moments, to let them pass by without allowing them to consume me. They were part of who I was, yes, but they no longer had the power to control me. Time passed, and as I looked back on everything that had led me here, to this quiet life in the mountains with Celia, I saw the beauty of it all, the struggle, the pain, the heartbreak, hadn't been wasted. It had carved out a space for the person I was becoming. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I took Celia's hand and led her to the same bench by the lake. The air was crisp now, the leaves shifting in the breeze as we sat side by side, not needing to speak. But this time, there was something different between us. We were no longer two people who had been defined by their pasts, by the betrayal and loss that had once consumed us. We were two people, choosing to embrace the possibility of a future, together. The months that followed felt like a new chapter, one where I was finally able to step into a life I could be proud of. Celia and I grew closer with each passing day, and our bond deepened in ways I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the peace we found in each other's presence. It was the shared understanding, the quiet acceptance that we had both seen the darker sides of life and still managed to find a way forward. We began to build a rhythm, a life that felt more grounded than anything I had ever known before. We spent mornings hiking through the mountains, afternoons working on our respective projects, her writing, my business ventures, and evenings curled up together, often in silence, as we let the comfort of each other's presence fill the space between us. But life, as always, wasn't without its surprises. One evening, about a year after I had settled in this peaceful little town, I received a call. The number was unfamiliar, and the moment I saw it, my heart skipped a beat. Something told me it was connected to the past I had been trying to escape. I hesitated, but eventually I answered. "Hello?" I said, my voice a little rougher than I intended. "Is this David Westbrook?" The voice on the other end was low, smooth, and unmistakably familiar. It was Claire's. My stomach clenched. "Yes," I replied, keeping my tone measured. "David," she said, her voice laced with hesitation, as though unsure whether to continue. "It's Claire. I need to talk to you." There was a long pause, the silence thick with the weight of everything we'd been through. I felt the past stirring inside me, but I couldn't bring myself to hang up. Not yet. "Why now?" I asked, my voice colder than I meant it to be. "It's been over a year, Claire. Why call me now?" I know it's been a long time," she said quickly, "but I need you to listen. It's important." I swallowed, unsure of how to respond. I had moved on from the anger. I had rebuilt my life. But something in her voice pulled me back in, just for a moment. Something was off. "I'm listening," I said, though every instinct in me told me I should hang up. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Claire continued, her voice tight with emotion. "I'm not even asking for you to understand, but David, I made a mistake. A horrible mistake. And I need you to know the truth. About everything." My heart raced. Part of me wanted to cut the call short, to tell her that I had no interest in hearing any more of her excuses. But I couldn't help it. My curiosity, the need for closure, drove me forward. "Go on," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was involved in something I didn't tell you about before. Something with Ethan and—" She paused, her voice wavering. "And someone else. Someone you don't know." I felt a chill run down my spine. There had always been something about Claire that had never fully added up, something in her actions that I hadn't been able to place. But this was different. "Who?" I demanded, though I could already feel the pieces beginning to shift into place. "The man I was with before you," she said. "His name is Victor. He's been trying to destroy you, David. He's been working with Ethan." I froze. The name Victor echoed in my mind, but I couldn't place him. "What does that have to do with me?" "Everything," Claire whispered. "He's the one who helped Ethan steal from your business. He's been pulling strings behind the scenes, trying to bring you down financially. I was blinded by my own emotions, but I didn't know the full extent of it until recently. And now I need to tell you. You need to know the truth." I was silent. For a moment, the realization hitting me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about Ethan's betrayal or Claire's infidelity. This was something far more sinister. Something that went deeper, that reached into the heart of my professional life, the very thing I had worked so hard to protect. "Why tell me this now?" I asked, my voice low, measured, though inside I felt a storm brewing, because I can't live with the guilt anymore. I need you to know, to stop him before it's too late. I leaned back against the wall, the weight of her words settling in. A part of me wanted to shut her out, to tell her I didn't care. But deep down, I knew she was right. This was far from over. There was more to this betrayal than I had ever realized. "I'll take care of it," I said, my voice steady now, the resolve settling in my chest. "But this ends here, Claire. Don't ever contact me again." "I understand." she replied softly. "And I'm sorry, David, for everything." I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. Celia, who had been sitting nearby, must have heard the change in my voice. She looked up at me with concern, sensing that something had shifted. "What happened?" she asked, her voice gentle. I stared at the phone in my hand, the weight of the conversation still hanging heavily in the air. "There's more. Much more." Celia moved closer, her eyes searching mine. The days that followed felt like a quiet storm brewing. I couldn't shake the weight of Claire's confession, or the sense that everything I had worked for, the life I had painstakingly built, was now in jeopardy. The truth had opened a door, and I had no choice but to walk through it, no matter how dark it seemed on the other side. I spent hours each day digging into Victor's background, researching connections, uncovering anything I could that might give me an edge. The more I learned, the more I realized how carefully orchestrated the whole scheme had been. Victor wasn't just some opportunistic schemer. He was a master at manipulation, pulling strings behind the scenes, building alliances with people who had the power to ruin lives, just as he had tried to ruin mine. Celia, always perceptive, noticed the shift in me. She could see the tension in my posture, the way my mind seemed elsewhere as I worked late into the night, tracking down leads and piecing together the fragments of a puzzle that was beginning to make sense. One evening, as I stared at the screen, in front of me, trying to connect the final pieces of Victor's web, Celia sat down beside me. Her presence was a comfort, a grounding force that kept me from drowning in the overwhelming flood of information. "You don't have to do this alone," she said quietly, her voice steady but full of understanding. "We'll face whatever's coming together, remember?" I met her gaze, the weariness in my eyes a stark contrast to the calm reassurance in hers. "I know, but this isn't just about me anymore, Celia. If Victor has been involved in all this, he's been working behind the scenes for too long. I can't let him destroy everything I've built. And I won't let him hurt you either." She reached over and took my hand, her grip firm and comforting. "You're not alone. Whatever happens, we'll deal with it together. I'm not going anywhere." Her words were like a lifeline, and for the first time in days, I allowed myself to breathe. We were in this, truly, together. No more shadows from the past, no more ghosts haunting me. Just Celia and me, facing whatever the future held. The following morning, I hired a private investigator to track down Victor's whereabouts. I wasn't about to leave anything to chance, not when so much was at stake. The investigator, a sharp woman named Ingrid, was known for her discretion and thoroughness. I briefed her on everything I had uncovered so far and asked her to find out everything she could about Victor's business dealings, associates, and any other connections he might have to Ethan, or anyone else who might be involved in this scheme. Days turned into a week, and I found myself waiting, caught in a limbo of uncertainty. It was maddening, not knowing where the pieces would fall. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Victor get away with this. Not after everything he had done. Finally, Ingrid came through. Her findings were more than I had expected. Victor had deep ties to a group of investors who had been circling around my company for years. They had been trying to buy me out, offering lowball deals that I had turned down. But what Ingrid discovered was more disturbing. Victor had been manipulating those investors, using his connections to sway them against me. His endgame was simple: undermine my business, break my spirit, and buy everything I had worked for at a fraction of its worth. Ingrid also uncovered something that made my blood run cold. Victor had been keeping tabs on me, watching my every move through a network of informants. He knew when I was vulnerable, when I was struggling with the aftermath of Claire's betrayal. It made me sick to think how deeply he had inserted himself into my life without me even realizing it. But there was something even more chilling. Victor wasn't working alone. He had a silent partner, someone high up in the business world, someone whose name hadn't come up in any of my previous investigations. The thought that someone so powerful had been pulling the strings, hidden in the shadows, sent a ripple of fear through me. I took the information to Celia, who listened intently, her face serious but supportive. "This is bigger than you thought," she said, her voice calm but full of concern. "You can't do this alone anymore, David. We need a plan, something that can turn the tables on them." She was right. This had grown far beyond a personal vendetta. It was a battle for everything I had built, and for everything that was at risk. But I wasn't about to let Victor win. I spent the next few days meeting with a select few trusted allies, people who had no love for Victor and his cohorts. I wasn't going to let them take what was mine, not when I had the resources to fight back. We crafted a plan, one that involved turning Victor's own tactics against him. We would, expose his network of deceit, his manipulation of investors, and his role in the financial sabotage of my company. The day of the confrontation arrived faster than I anticipated. The weight of everything I had uncovered, the deception, the betrayal, the ruthless ambition of Victor and his associates, had been pressing down on me for weeks. But now, with everything in place, I felt a strange sense of calm. The plan had been set into motion, and there was no more room for doubt or hesitation. Celia was there, as she had been through it all, supporting me with a steady hand and quiet strength. She didn't fully understand the intricacies of business warfare, but she understood the human element, the emotions, the scars, the need for closure. And most of all, she understood me. I had arranged a meeting with Victor at a neutral location, a high-end conference room at a law firm where I had booked time for the final confrontation. The room itself was sleek, sterile, designed for deals and negotiations, not for the kind of battle that was about to unfold, but it would do. I had spent the night before carefully going over the evidence, making sure every angle was covered. Ingrid had done her part, providing the final pieces of Victor's network and his shady dealings. I knew who to target, how to corner him, and most importantly, how to take away his power without a single shot being fired. As I walked into the room, Victor was already there, seated at the large glass table. He was dressed in his usual expensive suit, a smug expression on his face as if he had everything under control. He didn't know yet what was coming. He didn't even rise when I entered, just waved a hand toward the chair across from him. "David, good to see you. I trust you've been keeping busy." I sat down slowly, meeting his eyes. He still had that confident air, as though the power he held over my life was unshakable. But I knew better. This was the moment when his empire of lies and manipulation would come crashing down. "I've been keeping busy," I said quietly, "but not in the way you think." Victor raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "And what do you mean by that?" I took a deep breath and slid a folder across the table to him. "I think you know exactly what I mean." Victor looked at the folder, his fingers hovering above it for a moment before he opened it. His eyes scanned the contents, his face slowly draining of color as he saw the evidence laid out before him. The first few pages detailed his financial manipulations, how he had been using his influence over key investors to force them into sabotaging my company, pushing lowball buyout offers and twisting the market in his favor. The deeper he went, the more his expression darkened. The next set of pages revealed his connections to Ethan, how he had orchestrated the entire scheme, feeding Ethan information and encouraging him to pursue Claire, knowing full well that it would destroy me emotionally and professionally. And, finally, the most damning evidence, a detailed list of his network of informants, people embedded in my company, people feeding him inside information, helping him pull the strings from behind the scenes. Victor's gaze flickered up at me, his eyes narrowing. "This is impossible." "I don't think so," I said, my voice steady. "You've been working behind the scenes for far too long, Victor. You've been playing games with people's lives, manipulating everyone around you like puppets. But it ends now. For the first time, I saw a crack in his facade. He stood up, knocking the chair back with a sharp scrape, and started pacing. "You think you can just come in here and undo everything I've done? You think these papers mean anything?" I didn't flinch. "They mean everything." Victor was quiet for a moment, his breath coming in shallow bursts. "You're a fool, David. You have no idea who you're dealing with. You think you can ruin me with a few papers? I have connections, power, resources beyond your imagination. You'll regret this." I shook my head, feeling the confidence rise within me. "I don't think you understand, Victor. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about everyone you've hurt, everyone you've manipulated and used as pawns in your little game. You've built your empire on lies, but that empire is built on sand, and I'm here to watch it crumble." His eyes flickered to the door, and I knew the moment had arrived. The trap had been set. Before he could make a move, I reached for the final document in the folder. It was the key piece of evidence that would destroy everything he had worked for. A confidential memo from one of his business partners, implicating him in a larger conspiracy involving other shady dealings. I had arranged for the press to receive a copy of that document within the hour. I slid the paper toward him, a silent challenge in my eyes. "You see, I'm not alone in this fight. I've got the media, the authorities, and a few very influential people on my side now. You'll be the one facing the consequences of your actions, and there's no way out." The days following the confrontation were a whirlwind. Victor had underestimated the ripple effect his actions would have, not only on his own life but on the lives of those around him. The media picked up on the story faster than I anticipated, and the moment the story broke, it felt like a tidal wave was crashing over him. His carefully cultivated reputation of success and power crumbled in a matter of hours. The business partners he had once manipulated turned on him, and investors who had once trusted his every move now saw him as a liability. The walls were closing in. Victor's once invincible empire of manipulation, power, and deceit shattered under the weight of truth. His assets were frozen, his name tarnished in the media, and the authorities moved in, their investigations revealing even darker dealings than I had originally uncovered. He had nowhere to hide anymore. And though part of me reveled in the sweet taste of justice, I also felt the weight of the consequences. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about dismantling an entire life built on lies. And no matter how justified it was, it left a hollow feeling inside me. Through it all, Celia remained by my side, unwavering. She had seen me at my lowest as I battled through the aftermath of betrayal, but now she saw me at my strongest. We spent days reflecting on the journey we had taken together, our conversations rich with understanding. It was no longer about what had happened, but what we could build together moving forward. One evening, as we sat on the porch of our home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Celia turned to me with a thoughtful expression on her face. "David," she began, her voice soft yet firm, "you've done everything you set out to do. You've taken back control, exposed the truth, and rebuilt your life. But do you ever think about what's next?" I looked at her, considering her words carefully. The last year had been nothing, short of a roller coaster, filled with betrayal, loss, and the raw determination to rebuild. But she was right. We had reached a point where I could start looking ahead. The fight was over, but the battle for a peaceful future had only just begun. "I think about it all the time," I admitted, taking her hand in mine. "For so long, I was focused on surviving. I had to keep moving, keep fighting, because if I stopped, everything I worked for would slip away. But now, with you by my side, I can finally start thinking about the life I want to build. A life that's mine, without all the noise from the past." Celia smiled, the warmth in her eyes, radiating in the fading light. "We're not just surviving anymore, David. We're living. And whatever happens next, We'll do it together. I squeezed her hand, the weight of everything that had happened slowly lifting from my shoulders. There was still work to be done. Victor's empire was crumbling, but the legal battles were just beginning. I knew there would be a few more hurdles before we could truly leave the past behind. But for the first time in a long while, I wasn't worried. I wasn't afraid. The storm had passed, and what remained was something strong, something worth fighting for. As the weeks went by, the legal battles with Victor dragged on. His lawyers fought tooth and nail, but the evidence was irrefutable. Slowly but surely, his grip on the remnants of his empire loosened. The authorities closed in, and soon he was facing charges not only for his financial crimes, but for a multitude of other illegal activities. His fall from grace was swift and unforgiving. As his downfall continued, I focused on rebuilding my business. It wasn't just about regaining what I had lost. It was about creating something new, something stronger. I partnered with a team of people I trusted, and together, we built a company that not only survived the crisis, but thrived in its wake. I became a leader, not just in my industry, but in my own life. The lessons I had learned about trust, about perseverance, about the importance of protecting what matters, became the foundation of everything I did. But it wasn't all about work. Celia and I found ourselves taking long trips to places we had always dreamed of visiting. We explored new cities, hiked in the mountains, and spent lazy afternoons doing nothing but enjoying each other's company. It was the freedom I had longed for. The ability to live without the weight of past mistakes or betrayals hanging over me. One evening, as we sat together by the fire pit in our backyard, I looked at Celia and realized how far I had come. This was the life I had fought for, the life I had finally found peace in, and I knew, without a doubt, that it was worth every sacrifice. I don't think I've ever told you how much you mean to me, I said softly, turning to her. She smiled, a gentle smile that seemed to brighten everything around us. I think you've shown me, David. Every single day. As the months passed, the world I had once feared losing felt more like my own than ever. The pieces of my life, once shattered, were now neatly fitting together. The work I had done to rebuild my business, the closure from confronting Victor, and the support of Celia had all created a sense of stability I had long yearned for. I found myself looking ahead, rather than behind. The pain of betrayal, the anger at the injustice, the regret that had once consumed me, all of it had been replaced with a quiet strength. There was still a lot of work to be done, of course, and the scars from the past would never fully fade. But I had learned to live with them, to integrate them into who I had become. I had learned to trust again, not just in others, but in myself. 1. Afternoon, as I sat in my office reviewing new proposals for an expansion project, I received an unexpected call. It was from my lawyer. "David, I need to talk to you about something," he said, his voice clipped with urgency. "It's about Victor." The name sent a ripple of tension through me, though I had long since moved on from him. My mind immediately started calculating possible scenarios. Had his downfall been delayed? Had he somehow managed to find a way back into the game? "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's something you need to see," my lawyer replied. "It's unexpected. Meet me in the office in an hour." I hung up the phone, a sense of unease settling over me. Despite all the work I'd done to put Victor out of my mind, I couldn't help but feel the old sting of unfinished business. When I arrived at the office, my lawyer was waiting for me, his expression grim. He handed me a thick envelope. Inside were documents I wasn't expecting. Victor's confession, or at least something that looked like one. As I flipped through the papers, it became clear that Victor wasn't done yet. The documents were a detailed account of his dealings, not only related to the financial sabotage of my business, but also new information about his involvement with people I hadn't even considered. His confession seemed to be an attempt at making amends, or perhaps at least bargaining for leniency. But the real shock came in the final pages. There was a letter, written by Victor himself, addressed to me. "David, I've thought about what you did to me, and what you've taken from me, and I can't help but feel that I may deserve it. I betrayed you, I manipulated you, and I tried to ruin everything you've worked for. But what you don't know is that I wasn't working alone. There are others involved, people much more dangerous than I ever was. And now they know what I've done. I'm not just a pawn in their game, David. They're coming for both of us, and I don't know if we can stop them. Victor." The letter hit me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Victor had always been the villain in this story. But now he was warning me about something bigger, a shadowy force that was lurking in the background, one that had never crossed my mind. I looked up from the letter, my lawyer's face mirroring my own shock. "Do you think it's real?" I asked, my voice tight with tension. "I don't know," he said, his eyes scanning the pages in front of him. "But this isn't the kind of thing you make up. If Victor's telling the truth, we're looking at something much more complicated than we thought." I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. Who were these people Victor had mentioned? What was their game? And why was he coming forward now, after everything that had happened? "Do we contact the authorities?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. My lawyer hesitated before responding. "It's possible, but we need more information first. If there's a bigger player behind this, we need to be prepared. We can't just go off of what Victor's saying." I nodded, my mind already shifting gears. This wasn't over. The peace I had worked so hard to rebuild was suddenly threatened by an unknown force, and I wasn't about to sit back and let it unfold without a fight. "Let's dig into this," I said, my voice firm. "I'm not walking into another trap." Over. The next few days, I began investigating the new lead Victor had provided. Every new revelation sent me down a deeper rabbit hole. I reached out to contacts in my network, people I knew could help me uncover the truth about this new threat. But the more I uncovered, the more it became clear that whoever these people were, they were shadowy figures who operated in the darkest corners of the business world. They had resources, power, and influence, things I had once thought were behind me. As I dug deeper, I found whispers of their involvement in some of the same industries Victor had been working in. But the real shock came when I stumbled upon the name of one of the key players, someone I had never thought to suspect. It was someone close to me, a trusted ally from the very beginning. The feeling of déjà vu was suffocating. Betrayal was something I thought I had put behind me, something I had carefully wiped away. But this new threat, this shadowy network lurking beneath the surface of my world, had pulled me back into a game I wasn't ready to play again, but I wasn't naive anymore. I knew better than to walk into this without being prepared, without understanding the stakes. The name I had uncovered, the trusted ally who had been playing both sides, someone I had considered a close friend, was a revelation that shattered what little peace I had left. How could I have missed it? How had I been so blind? Celia. Ever. The rock I could lean on was the first to notice the shift in my demeanor. She could always tell when something was off, and this time was no different. "What's going on, David?" she asked, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, her eyes narrowing as she studied my face. "I can see something's bothering you." I sighed, rubbing my temples. It had been a long day of digging, pulling together pieces of information that made my blood run cold. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became that the people involved in this plot weren't just after my business. They were after everything I had built, everything I loved. "It's worse than I thought," I said, my voice low, filled with a quiet fury. "It's not just Victor. Someone close to me, someone I trusted, has been playing both sides. They've been feeding information to this network. They've been part of it the whole time. Celia's eyes widened. Who? I paused, letting the silence hang between us for a moment. The name felt heavy in the air, like it was too dangerous to say out loud. Jonathan, I finally managed, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. Jonathan had been my right-hand man, someone I had brought into the fold when I started rebuilding after the initial collapse. He was the kind of person you thought you could trust, the kind who showed loyalty in every interaction, who had been there during my darkest moments. But it had all been a facade. He had been playing the game from both sides, feeding secrets to the enemy, undermining everything I had worked so hard to rebuild. You're sure? Celia asked quietly, her voice tinged with disbelief. I'm sure, I said, my eyes locked on hers, the weight of the truth sinking in. I have evidence. I've been tracking his movements, his contacts, and it all lines up. He's been feeding information to people I never imagined would be involved. Celia was silent for a moment, processing the enormity of what I had just revealed. Then she leaned forward, her face resolute. So what do we do now? I met her, gaze, my mind already working through the plan. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but I wasn't about to back down. Not this time. We expose him, I said, my voice steady with conviction. I'll confront him directly. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth, what he's been doing behind my back. And I'll make sure he understands that this time, there's no escape. Celia nodded, her support unwavering. I'll help you. We'll do this together. Over. The next few days, I took meticulous care in planning the confrontation. I gathered the evidence I had on Jonathan, texts, emails, phone records, and made sure everything was airtight. There was no room for error this time, no way for him to wiggle out of this. Finally, the day came. Jonathan had agreed to meet with me, under the pretense of discussing business. But I knew the truth. This wasn't about business. This was about exposing the truth and severing the ties that had bound us. I met him in the same conference room where I had confronted Victor. This time, however, there would be no negotiation, no attempt at understanding. I had given him many chances, too much trust. When he walked in, his usual confident smile faltered for a brief moment as his eyes met mine, but he quickly recovered, taking a seat across from me with a casual air. His relaxed posture, the calm tone in his voice, made it clear he thought this would be another ordinary meeting. So, David, what's this about? He asked, his voice smooth, just like always. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I slid the stack of documents across the table to him. Explain this, I said, my voice cold and firm. Jonathan's eyes flicked to the papers, and I could see the slightest twitch of recognition on his face. He didn't need to read any further. He knew exactly what I had found. The silence between us grew heavy as I waited for his response. Well, David, he began slowly, his calm demeanor cracking for the first time. This isn't exactly how I envisioned things going. Yeah, I said, leaning forward, my voice low and steady. I don't think this is how anyone envisioned things going. But here we are. Jonathan looked at me, a fleeting moment of guilt flickering across, his face before he masked it with a smug smile. You always were too trusting. That's your problem, David.